Hello students, welcome back. This is Module 6.2.4, Biodiversity 2. In this module we're going to discuss biological diversity and especially, as you see on the slide before you, threats to biodiversity. One way that you can remember some of these threats is with the acronym HIPPO. Did you ever play that game, Hungry Hungry Hippo, when you were a kid? Well, this is a different kind of hippo. The H stands for habitat destruction and fragmentation. Now, although most of these are not in any particular order, it turns out that habitat destruction is the greatest threat to ecosystems and biodiversity. So the fact that it is the first one does coincide with its level of impact. So this is critical, and of course, as humans increase in number, we need more and more land to feed us all, and it comes at the expense of other species. Now, we're not going to discuss all of these, but the second one is invasive species, and this is exotic or introduced or alien species, species that evolved in a different ecosystem and then are artificially, through the intervention of humans, moved to another place. And one example that's right here is the Stevens Island wren, and we'll look at that in a moment. A third threat to biodiversity underlies really all the others, and that's population growth of humans. The more humans there are, the lower the margin of error that we have. We have to be very precise. And so if there's fewer of us, we can be less precise and make more mistakes, but there are more of us and it doesn't seem like our precision is increasing. In any case, a fourth threat is pollution. Again, more humans, more pollution. And a fifth threat is O for over-harvesting. This would be over-hunting or overfishing, taking wild species. Of course, the greatest threat was the first one, the H for habitat destruction. And humans simply changed land use. This is a euphemism for we take a bulldozer and scrape all the plants off and take away all the habitat and put something there for humans. We'll look at a couple of these. For example, here are a series of photos taken in the same area over time. And what this shows is deforestation. It occurs along these roads, which are made in a parallel fashion. So here we can see pretty much pristine rainforest, and you can see the losses that have occurred. And so roads are the beginning of the end for an intact forest. An example of exotic species would be the Stevens Island wren. Here's one right here, just actually two stuffed birds, as they were. This is an island down by New Zealand, and they put a lighthouse on this island, and the lighthouse keeper brought his cat, and the cat brought in these funny little birds, and the lighthouse keeper, kind of as a hobby, stuffed them. And these are the only known specimens of the Stevens Island wren. This is the only flightless perching bird of modern times. I mean, we have other flightless birds, but they don't belong to the order Passeriformes, which is where the perching birds are. And so that was incredible that one exotic animal could wipe out a species, but that seems to be what happened. Another example of the negative impact of invasive or introduced species is buffalo grass. Buffalo grass was introduced into the Sonoran Desert. Now, the Sonoran Desert typically has an open has open spaces that have mineral soil with no grass, but this green in between here is buffalo grass. This makes the desert subject to drying, subject to not only drying, but subject to burning. Now, normally it wouldn't burn because you have succulent plants separated by bare mineral soil, but you put the grass in here, it dries up, and it can lead to a devastating fire, and then you can have greater invasion of buffalo grass and other species. And the cacti are killed by fire. They're not fire-adapted species. So this is a threat right here. Every now and then they'll have buffalo grass removal parties down in the Tucson area where the true Sonoran Desert is found. I want to speak to you about three different species just as examples of biological diversity. And these three are a species of perennial corn, a plant called rosy periwinkle, and then a plant called Pacific yew. First, perennial corn. It turns out that there was a stand of rainforest in southern Mexico that was about to be slashed and burned for subsistence agriculture. That is, people were going to cut down the rainforest so they could grow food to subsist upon. And a biologist was in the area, and he discovered a plant that he had never seen before. It was a species of perennial corn. Now, if you know about corn, corn is an annual plant. It has to be replanted every year and plowed under after harvest, or they cut the stalks out or whatever. And it costs a lot of money to bring that equipment into the field and compact the soil, and it causes soil erosion. And so it's very costly to have this an annual plant. And so the idea was that the perennial corn has the potential to be interbred and perhaps make corn plants perennial, and thereby reduce this the need for all the cultural interventions with tractors and whatnot in annual corn. It could save millions and millions of dollars. Now, this hasn't happened, in fact, but it was the potential. And the thing was that perennial corn species was going to be lost to science and to humans. And so that's just an example of the way that these things can happen. A second example is of a plant that has realized great values in the human economy. And this plant is rosy periwinkle. It's found on the island of Madagascar. Madagascar is off the southeast coast of Africa. And Madagascar has many endemic species, E-N-D-E-M-I-C. Endemic means found there and found nowhere else. And so many species on the island of Madagascar are found nowhere else in the world. And rosy periwinkle, it is the source of 2 anti-cancer drugs that both help fight forms of leukemia. And it has realized millions of dollars in pharmaceutical value. And the fact is that there are more species of periwinkle on Madagascar that have not been tested for beneficial drugs. And like rosy periwinkle, which is now grown elsewhere, they're endangered by slash and burn agriculture. Again, some of the delay is the feeling of the indigenous people that the corporations now benefiting from rosy periwinkle did not provide adequate compensation. The native peoples of Madagascar feel that they were cheated, and in a sense, they may have been. And so let's look at, you might think, oh yeah, out there in Mexico and in Madagascar, we can see this happening. But the fact of the matter is, it happens right here. In the Pacific Northwest, where some of the greatest timber-growing forests in the world are found, there was a small conifer called the Pacific yew. The Pacific yew was an understory plant, and it grew under these great forests. And for many years, when an area was cut down for lumber, typically a clear cut, they would take the Pacific yew and just put it on the slash pile and burn it. But then it was found that the Pacific yew contained a chemical called Taxol. And Taxol was useful for treating breast cancer. And after years of being eliminated by those forestry practices, the clear cuts, all of a sudden the yews had great value. And there was kind of a rush to get these trees that could be worth quite a bit of money. And scientists reverse engineered the chemical. They copied the chemical. Now they can synthetically make Taxol. And so does that mean it's okay to now go back to the previous practices? Well, of course not, because there could be other species. We need to value all the species and not simply destroy things mindlessly. And this really brings me, these three examples bring us to a very important question, because I would wager that the majority of students had never heard of any of these species. And so the question is, why should you care about obscure plants and animals? And I'm going to answer in purely human terms, that is, being very human-centered. Although I do value other species and think that they have an innate right to exist, the arguments I'm going to present to you are based only on the welfare of the human species. And perhaps quite importantly, is the concept of environmental services, or sometimes called ecological services, for us and all of nature. And to help explain what's going on here and why we should preserve this, I'm going to use an analogy of a rivet popper. Now, I know people don't know what a rivet popper is, but let's suppose that you were taking a flight on an airplane and you looked out and you saw some guy out on the wing of the airplane, and he was taking his little rivet popping tool and popping rivets out of the wing. Kapoing! Kapoing! Out goes the rivets flying out. And these are the rivets that are holding the plane together that you're about to fly on. And suppose that this is in the world of pre-9/11, you could get out of the plane and say, "Dude, what are you doing?" And the guy could say, I do this before every flight. I pop out a few rivets. It never seems to hurt anything. And of course, you should be able to recognize that rivets hold the plane together just like species hold ecosystems together. And the functioning of the entire plane is dependent upon individual little parts, and the same is true of ecosystems. That species that might seem of little importance to us may have roles in totality that hold the fabric of the ecosystem together. And so when we talk about environmental services or ecological services for humans, we're talking about biological diversity, forests and climate and the hydrological cycle, rivers and clean water and oceans and nitrogen fixation, food webs, decomposition, biogeochemical cycles, the atmosphere, protection from ultraviolet radiation, topsoil and soil formation, pollution, breakdown and absorption, buffering against large disturbances, and even more. Here's a figure which kind of shows ecosystem services over here on the left, and over on the right is kind of the constituents of well-being. This figure is taken from the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment that was done by the United Nations by many top ecologists and scientists to kind of look at the state of things. And the constituents of well-being, this is what humans need to live fulfilled and happy and safe lives: security, basic material for a good life, health, good social relations, freedom of choice and action. And ecosystem services tie in, and they have these different arrows. And look at the different parts of ecosystem services. They say provisioning, they provide, ecosystems provide food, fresh water, wood and fiber, fuel. Regulating ecosystems regulate climate, they regulate floods, they regulate disease, they purify water. And cultural benefits of ecosystem services, it can be aesthetic, it can be spiritual, educational, recreational. So this just gives you an idea of some of the ecosystem services. The second is really closely related, and this is enlightened self-interest, and that is that biological wealth may become material wealth and contribute directly to human economic well-being. Drugs in the USA, over 40% of drugs are derived from organisms, and the majority of organisms on the planet have not been tested for useful drugs. And so there we go. Foods can be derived from species other than the ones that we currently use. We have artificially greatly increased the population of chickens and cows because we eat them, and the same is true of course, plant agricultural species. Think of wheat and rice and corn, for example. There are other products in addition to food and drugs, and of course aesthetics and philosophy. These are things. I want to give you another analogy here, and so I'm going to again draw a picture. So you should be able to recognize this because I am a great artist. This is a pointy tree. So you might properly guess it's a conifer. And if I put a star on the top and put some decorations on this tree, you might recognize it, especially at this time of year, as a Christmas tree. Now, what's underneath a Christmas tree? Our presents. These are good things that are wrapped up. We can't see what they are, but we presume that they are good. And that's the way that some of the gifts of nature are. We don't know what they are, but they are good. But instead of opening the presents, instead of understanding nature and trying to discern if it's something that could be useful to humans and help humans, what we're allowing to happen is a mindless destruction. So instead of opening this present, we set a little fire down here and we burn all of the presents in the tree, and everything is gone without benefiting us. Well, that is just not smart, and yet that is what's happening on a very large scale here in the United States right now. And so with that sad analogy of the Christmas tree, with the presents that were never opened, I'm going to conclude this module, and we have only one more module after this. So we'll be back with you in a bit.